Hey friends, I believe we are live. You want
And
to
I'm
check
on
your phone?
time.
Or are we? You are on
It says
time.
it says on live on Facebook.
Live on Facebook. So welcome, friends. I'm gonna record this here, babe. Recording. All right, friends, welcome. My name is Heidi Mitro, and joining me is my partner and husband and best friend, Michael Mitro. Welcome,
Hello.
honey.
Thank you.
And we have been doing lots of videos over the last several weeks, and we have decided to just make this a regular thing. The feedback has been really incredible, and a lot of people kind of watching on the sly. I think you're experiencing this too, Mike, where it's like, hey, I'm watching your videos, but there's nowhere that we're actually seeing that they're watching. So we
Mm.
know that there are people watching that aren't commenting, and that's totally okay. But we know that we're opening up conversation about race and racism in a way that is making it a little bit more accessible, a little bit more of a bridge opportunity. Holy hell, that's loud, dude. And so we've decided to make it a regular thing. So welcome to Wednesdays at noon with the Mitros. And today, I mean, we're just going for it. We're going right in. We are talking about the N-word today. And when we were talking about what the topic should be, this was like, okay, I guess we're just gonna go straight for it. So babe, why don't you introduce who you are, and then we can just dive right in.
I'm Mike, and I'm Heidi's husband, and I'm black, and um, yeah. I mean, I think that's. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to
Feel
follow
weird
that.
about going right for it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's uncomfortable, and I think that's part of the process, right? Like,
Is being uncomfortable talking about
yes,
this.
absolutely. Uh,
So what I would love, how I would love to start it, and for those of you leaving comments, just know that we will respond to every single comment, but we're not going to be doing it during our chat. We'll be doing it afterwards, but please let us know that you're watching and where you're watching from. And why don't you start with, like, how did you even learn about that word? How'd you grow up with it? What was your experience with it? We can
Growing
kind
up,
of give our
it was
dual
yeah.
experience.
Um, Well, I mean, for people who don't know, like I grew up in a multiracial family. I was adopted when I was 3 months old, and um, so that word was not necessarily anything that I ever heard at home. But growing up in a town that was diverse, um, it was a word that, for the most part, didn't have a negative connotation depending on who it came from, right? Like it was a term of
Depending,
endearment,
I missed it. Depending upon, what did you say?
where who it came from.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So it was like a term of endearment, like when you're talking with friends,
Black
what's up, my
friends.
nigga? Yeah, like
Yeah.
stuff. So um,
Like, even when you just said that, I'm like, oh God,
you
okay.
cringe, didn't you?
I did.
And
Right.
that's because your experience with it has more of a negative connotation.
Right.
And I've also had the reverse of that happen, where it's been used as um, a derogatory name to me. So
Well, and I
um,
think that for the purposes of our conversation, like, this isn't meant to be a history lesson, although I think it will be. This isn't meant as we are experts in race or um, anthropology, or right. Like, that's how we met, was in a cultural
cultural
anthropology class.
anthropology, yeah, at Mankato.
Right. But this isn't necessarily about um, making it right or wrong. I think
Hmm.
that where, like, my experience growing up with that word was only within the context of rap music. Like, it
Hmm.
wasn't anything that anybody said. I remember when I was really little, it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo. That was something that I had learned. But I learned very quickly that you changed it to tiger, right? Like, that was like, people knew that it was a bad word, but nobody talked about it.
Hmm.
But I remember we had to make that amendment of, like, it's a tigger or a tiger.
Hmm.
But I didn't understand why. I didn't know. I
I
did. No
never, I've
one
never heard that.
that with eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how I learned it, was
Yeah.
with the
All
N
right.
word. And then it
Sure.
was shifted, but I didn't understand why. And growing up in a super white town, I mean, all the dudes in my grade listened to Snoop, and it was like they felt super cool and they would sing it, but they wouldn't refer to each other that way. Like, I didn't have any black friends. I mean, we had one black kid in our class, and I'm sure there was banter, but it was never like I really never experienced anybody using that word until I was with you.
Mm-hmm.
And asking you questions about it, right, behind closed doors, like, why is it okay for you to use it? Why shouldn't I use it? Is there a difference if there's an A at the end of it or an ER, right? Like all of these. But can you, as a black man, and knowing that this is solely your opinion, can you give your opinion on whether or not that word should be like straight across the board not used, or if we need to have more space around its appropriateness?
My experience has been that it's the use of that culturally between Black folks it's a exhibition of taking the power of that word away from the negative connotation that it initially had.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just kind of become intertwined and interwoven into the cultural norms, and I still believe that no one has the right to determine whether, like outside of the cultural exchange, has the right to determine whether it's acceptable or not.
I threw a little bit of a curve at it this morning as we were talking about it. Like, for our kids who are black and white, if our kids used that word, they're going to pass for white. Like, there's so many nuances here. There's so much around it where I'm just like, for me, it's a hard no. Like, that is not anything that I am going to flirt with on the line, because to me, I have a side that I need to desire to stay on the other side of that.
Right. What I mean by that is, like, for someone to say you shouldn't use that when you're referring to each other because it's got a negative connotation, that doesn't work, right? Like, people would then be stepping over the line or stepping outside of their wheelhouse per se, and so
it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say, like, you can't say that to your black friends.
Yes, no, it would not be appropriate.
Would it be? And I really don't, we have not talked about this, so I feel a little weird, a little hot already. Like, if I were to say I'm not comfortable with you using that in front of me, is that still like dripping with white privilege and superiority? Or is that like, I just have to get over it?
I think you have to get over it. And when has that ever happened? Right? Like,
well, I mean, in conversations between you and cousins, that has been a word that has shown up, that it was new again for me. Like, oh shit, we're doing okay. That's and the only time.
What is it about? I mean, like, why does that exchange make you uncomfortable? I understand why, like,
I think
Larry from Queens saying that would set us both off, but go ahead.
Just a second, because when we were in lacrosse and that exchange happened, like, so Mike and I used to live in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and we went back to visit after we moved, and we were at our bar, like, right, like our bar, and there was a dude in his 50s who got up in your face and absolutely hurled that word at you with so much hate and venom, and told you that you needed to go to the N bar and no one wants you here, kind of stuff. I was stunned. like I don't know that I have ever been that angry or shocked in my entire life.
Mhm.
And so that word, just a second. I knew the intention behind that. I thought I got my cry out before we got on here. Like I had a little moment. The way that he said it was dripping with pain and hate. And so I have a visceral reaction, even if it's between two Black men. It's still a volatile, it feels like you're holding a bomb. It feels like it's hot. It's a hot topic. And watching that go down, I'll never forget that as long as I live. We'd had enough experiences of being a mixed race couple where you knew people were looking, or people, would cross the street to not be by you, that type of stuff, but I had never experienced. I was afraid. That level of hate
Mhm.
made me afraid. And so that exchange between you guys as two Black men, it's always going to trigger that memory for me, always.
Mhm. Right. Okay.
And I do think and I don't even know if this is valid, you have to tell me if I'm reaching here, but with our value of connection, that word doesn't feel like a connector word.
Mhm.
Like that word between you and I will never be about connection. And
Right.
it is about, I've had this conversation with multiple coaching clients, like we have to expand our ability to hold multiple opinions about things that are not either or.
Mhm.
And this, I don't think, is an either or. I think it's appropriate in some contexts and it's not in others. But I'm not here to make it right. We're just here to open up this conversation. And now I'm like, oh
Absolutely.
shit, did we get in over our heads?
We'll talk about it
Yeah.
offline.
Yeah. No, I want to talk about it now. That's why
Okay.
we're
All right.
here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a valid point, and I'm sure you're not the only one that feels like that. And at this, I mean, there's no right answer. I mean, I think that's the piece of it that is frustrating for people. And you talked about it last night, that perfectionistic tendency for people, to have
Especially
a
white
clearly
women.
defined boundary or a clearly defined like parameters to operate in. And I think that's problematic. Like there isn't that in this particular instance. From a larger perspective, there's no gray area when it comes
Right.
to, but within the context of like this kind of an exchange, I think we've earned the right, you know, to to use that word. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of contextually, like, yeah, it's not gonna be something
Intention.
that, yeah. So
Well, and I think where this conversation started was we've been having lots of dialogue with so many different community members and friends and colleagues.
mhm,
And this word has come forward where there was a conversation had between a group of friends, and a joke was told with that word. And our friend called this other person out and said, hey man, we're not doing that.
mhm,
And it created an uncomfortable atmosphere for them, but it also reminded you and I, we're only one person removed, maybe not even that far in some cases, where that word in 2020 is still being thrown around flippantly with the intention of it being hateful, and with the
yeah,
intention of it being, it isn't about connection, it is massively about disconnection.
yeah,
um, and it sparked the conversation between you and I again about this word, because it's going to show up where we live geographically in the middle of the country. It is incredibly white here, and this word still gets thrown around in jokes. It's still used in a derogatory way right where we live. And so I think part of the purpose of us having this conversation is, what are you going to do when that shows up? Because I think
mhm,
it will. I don't even know if it's a matter of if. I do think,
yeah,
based on where we live, it is a matter of when.
yep. And
And so I'm curious,
I had that exact conversation this morning during a meeting that I had, where now it's, the people who, it's time for people to step into that element of discomfort and be the person who says, that's not acceptable.
Right.
We're not doing that anymore. And it is uncomfortable and it will cause an issue, but I think it's to the point now where, again, it is either you are actively participating in the discord or you are actively participating in the solution. There's no room to just be neutral anymore because it's uncomfortable. That is status quo, and that's how we have arrived where we are. I feel like a broken record because I feel like I've been saying this over and over the last little while here, but I cannot stress that enough. Like the room for apathy doesn't exist anymore. And
so what would you say, because one of the reasons I wanted to start with where we began was, well, they call each other that. Like, what's wrong with me saying it in a joke if that's acceptable between Black men?
Because it's the connotation of the joke. Like, that joke is inherently disparaging, right? More often than, I don't know any good racist jokes. Do you? So
right. I mean there's a t-shirt.
You can't, I don't know. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but there's just no place for it. And so the context, of a conversation between me and somebody who looks like me is a term of camaraderie. It's a term of endearment. It is. I mean, it just is. Like, I am going to take that word and I am going to empower myself with it because of the historical context of the word. And like you said, we don't need to go into a history lesson. I think we all are aware, of the historical context of the word. And it is incumbent on people who have arrived at that level of self-awareness and self-reflection and realization that they're part of the solution to then step into the role of facilitating the conversation.
So what would you say, like, and we've been through this in different ways where, and this to me is not a political issue. This to me is human rights. This is interpersonal.
Yep.
But there is this theory, there is this phrase of it's locker room talk, right? That phrase started with it being about women.
Mm-hmm. Locker room talk is bullshit. Like,
there's
locker
your
room
t-shirt.
talk is not a thing. It is an excuse, right? It's an excuse that.
So let's say you're in a locker room or you're on a golf course or you're at a barbecue, and all of those things are, interesting timing anyhow. What happens if one of your buddies or someone in your family or someone in your inner circle is using actively racist terminology, including the N-word? What would you say? How do you even, I mean, you and I have difficult conversations all the time. I think we have a different tolerance. I don't know.
Threshold.
But yeah, but I there are still some people where I'm like, ooh, I don't know. Hi, Ivy. They're still, I mean, this is it's a thing. It's going to be a thing when we are gathering differently again. But what would you say? How do you handle it?
You have to be the person who makes the correction, and that's what it is. It's a correction. It's like we have to retrain the narrative. I think it's one of those, people are just, that's just how we do it. That's just how we talk. It's always been that way, and it's always been that way is never an excuse for anything, right? Honestly. And
well,
so,
and I think with you and I, it's a matter of, like, with our kids, we're not of the mindset of like, it's a one-time conversation. That's never going to be how it is in our house. And just say no or don't do it, or, any of those things. We're coaching them on what to actually say and having them say it back. Because it's one thing to think it, it's another thing to say it.
Yep.
And so I am curious, like, do you need to pause for a sec?
No.
Okay. Are they getting us lunch?
They're getting themselves a snack. So
I am curious what you would want them to say. And I don't, is that even the, I mean, if it happened in
what
my
would you want
midst,
them to say?
like if it were in my circle, like, for me, it would be much more direct. Like, dude, no way. That is not what we're doing. Not even close. Right.
I
Like,
can't imagine a scenario where that would happen in front of me.
in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a straight shutdown, but that's been an evolution. I mean, I shared this in a live previously where, you know, it was typically older men in my practice who would be like, this isn't about Mike, you know, he's one of the good ones. And then they would proceed to tell a racist joke. And my response was like, it's not really that funny. You know, that, do we say stuff like that anymore? It was more of a passive, but I feel like now it's like, hell no, man. Shut it down. That's not what we're doing.
I think this whole scenario has emboldened me in particular, and you, and I think a whole host of other people in a different way, and has elevated the level of confidence in the confrontational part of this, where it's like, you know better.
I think is an interesting word. What do you mean by that?
Like I like your direct response or your direct intervention in a conversation like that, where you're like, no, that's not what we're doing. Like before it was like, okay, there's got to be a nice way or a polite way. That ship has sailed now.
Right.
Because it
I still
hasn't
think
worked.
that there can be a level of respect where it's not, for me, it would never be, I'm not in the habit of like going for the jugular right out the gate. It's going to
I'm not saying that either, but I am saying like you versus like are we saying that like that passive kind of a response is not acceptable anymore. We are not saying that, right? And yes, there is a way to make it less aggressive, but I think it also does need to be firm at the same time. Like you don't get a pass. Like you don't get a pass. Like you have to.
I have a lot of white women reaching out like, I don't want to say the wrong thing and I don't want to have backlash. And it's like, we're just going to have tougher skin now. Like you are going to have to just risk it and risk looking like a bitch. That's specifically for white women. We don't want to look like a bitch, right?
Here's the thing. If you're worried about someone's response to this and you know it's wrong, even, then that tells you where they are on the continuum.
But I also think that there's a lot of recognition of like, oh, there's stuff coming up to the surface and you and I have talked about this, that there's a clarity in how people feel. We're like, oh, no way. Oh, I'm so disappointed in how this person is going forward, or the Facebook stuff that they're putting out, or the passive aggressive digs, or, there's a clarity in where people stand. And I do think that it matters to be able to say like, that doesn't fly with me, man. Like, you know which side I stand on, and you do have to pick.
Yep. Boys will be boys, locker room talk. That's just the way we've always done it. Those are deflection phrases, right? Like they steer you away from the root cause, which is a lack of exposure and experience,
or just flat out racism. Like not even maybe a lack of experience, but you're just an asshole. I mean, it may just be
there are scenarios where that is true. But I do think that, those responses don't stop. That's not where the conversation ends, right?
What do you mean?
That's an invitation then to say, what do you mean? Like, what does that actually mean when you say boys will be boys?
Right.
Or that's just how we've always done it. Who's we, and how you've always done what, right? What are you saying? Right. I think it's an invitation for further investigation.
Right.
And then I don't know, I think enough interactions like that will cause folks to have pause and really, and not everyone, but I think there are people on that part of the continuum who'll be like, maybe there is something to this,
Right.
I think that's happening more and more for people who felt like, you know, it was, maybe it's not racist because it's not the person that this is about's not in the room, or
Mm.
I know someone who's black, but I can still tell a joke when they're not around, like those kind of conversations. And we know that that's not right, you know.
Mhm.
I know that, you know that, and I think the more we talk about it and the more uncomfortable it makes people, the more room for growth and progress on the continuum there is.
What about the argument of like we have to be too politically correct, or you're a snowflake if you can't handle jokes like that, or that type of mentality? I'm curious about that, like, because I know people are worried about being PC on one hand, and like we are all way too sensitive on the other hand. I'm curious your opinion on that.
I think that when it comes to issues of race, there it's too big. Like, it's not about
You paused there,
politics.
sweetie. Can you say it again?
I said when it comes to issues of racial injustice and systemic racism, it's too big. Everyone knows, and it is not.
What do
It's
you
not
mean
a
by it's
political.
too
It's
big?
not a political issue. It's a human rights issue. It is a issue of suppression. Like there are systems in place to actively dehumanize people. That's not a sensitivity issue. That is
Hmm.
it's a human rights issue. It is, and so if that is your opinion, then we don't really have we don't have anywhere to meet to have a conversation about it, and then we're just going to have to agree to that you're wrong, and then eventually maybe you'll come to you'll come back around, and who knows what that requires experience wise, but I'm not going to engage in a conversation with someone who doesn't think that there's an issue like that. That's a no-win situation.
Well, and it's too, like you and I have talked about, and this is a broken record thing as well. We have to work from where we are on our continuum,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, I'm not talking to people this far down, and I can't, it would be disingenuous for me to pass myself off as a civil rights expert. That's not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But right here in the middle, if someone is telling a racist joke in front of me, and that has happened when people didn't know that I was married to you, it's also happened when people did.
Mm-hmm.
But there is now it's just it's a no. It's like, yeah, man, no, we're not doing that. That isn't how you aren't allowed to say that in my presence, and you got to check yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to, like we tell our kids, you need to practice what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Because you probably do have that family member who is not quite sure, but they're going to test the waters. Or maybe you've got a colleague who in the past has used a lot of racial slurs and you haven't called them on it, even though you haven't agreed about it. It's important that become a part of your, like when people say, I don't know what to do, what I, especially from the white women that I'm working with, this, I don't know what to do means I want to solve the whole issue, and I want to solve world peace, and I want it to have happened yesterday, and I'm so sorry and I feel guilty. And it's like, nope, have the tough conversation with Uncle Jim at Thanksgiving. Like that is how this shit changes, is it's that close to you. You don't have to go fix the healthcare system today, like that.
It's all connected, but it's also like there's progression. Like you have to start somewhere. If you wait until the time is right to do it all, you're never going to do it, and then we'll be back to the status quo.
Right.
That is, I mean, yeah, it starts with the interpersonal interactions. It starts with, first of all, like taking a stance and not being afraid to do that, and not being afraid of backlash, because like you said, there's no, I think people are looking for the 100% answer,
right?
And that doesn't exist.
Well, that's the perfectionism, right? That's I have to do it absolute and right. Sure.
And I think that's the only way it can happen it's through incremental and sustainable and inclusive solutions.
I do think it
that
starts
requires
with making that decision, right?
Yeah,
Like, are you anti-racist or are you not?
yeah, I mean, you're either a part of the solution or you're a part of the problem. There's no great. I think we've
Do you think that that's
established
you think that's as clear cut? Like it
I
is
do, because if
it's an either or.
It is an either or, because if you are not actively participating in the solution, that is silent, silent agreement with the other side of the coin. You can't be neutral because it affects everyone. I think that's another challenge, is there are people who feel like this doesn't necessarily affect them, but in actuality, like, their inaction condones the actions of those around them, because even if they're not actively participating in the solution or actively participating in the degradation, if they know people who are actively participating in the degradation and they're not saying anything, for example, when somebody tells a racist joke, then they're part of part of the problem.
Right. And I think it's important, and you and I have had this conversation a lot, to recognize that there will be a nervous system response when you are in those situations. And that's okay. Your nervous system should kick in. You should be in fight or flight or freeze.
That's how you know that it's wrong. Like, your body is telling you, because that means you've got that level of self-awareness to know.
And that discomfort will lead you home. That discomfort will lead you back to your connection with yourself.
You can't shut it down. Eventually it's going to catch up. You're going to start to physical symptoms will start to manifest if you continue to operate in that level of discomfort, that level of
it's disconnection.
Immune system response almost, right?
And if you're hanging out with people where your immune system is kicked in most of the time, that is a cue that you are not hanging around with aligned people, which goes back to values, which goes back to yes, this is about race. Yes, this is about human issues, but we can blow that out even more macro about this is about connection, and this is about health, and this is about racial equality. It is much more macro. You can blow it out.
Yep. And there are a whole host of other companion issues that go along and contribute to this, when you're talking about connection and nutrition and all these other things that can play into the way that your brain works and how potentially receptive you are to ideas that run contrary to your own, or to your experiences. And so, it's a systemic problem on lots of levels.
Right. And start where you are.
Yeah.
Start where you are. And I think, we went right for kind of the controversial topic. I think we'll probably just continue to do that. I think it fosters conversation. It fosters self-reflection, which is where it has to start, in my opinion.
People have to get there on their own. That's another thing. That's another one of those repetitive statements.
What do you mean by they have to get there on their own? I don't know if I agree with that.
People have to arrive at the acknowledgement or the point of discovery within themselves that something has to change. Like, I can't talk at someone enough to make them realize or agree with me. It's just like with anything else, I use fitness as the example because that is where, this particular skill set for me has started, where it's like, I can't make you go home and eat a salad after you work out if you want to go through Wendy's. But then don't complain to me about the fact that you're not reaching your goals, because you know what you're supposed to do. And so,
how does that equate to race in your mind?
People have to arrive at the conclusion that they have to acknowledge it. They have to be able to acknowledge the fact that there's an issue and that it's wrong. It's one thing to acknowledge it and continue to do the racist thing. It's another to arrive at the decision or the awareness that something has to change.
Right.
And that that is that self-reflective, like, oh, am I really a good human, or am I actively working for the suppression and subjugation of someone who doesn't look like me because it makes me uncomfortable that they might be considered my equal, or whatever the thing is,
Right. And some of that, I think, is it's on that continuum of there's just like blatant racist people. I
was using an extreme example,
right?
But,
no. But I think that that isn't who we're trying to change their mind. If you've got a family member who's committed to being racist, that the only person, and we talk about this all the time within the context of our family, but the only person that you really have influence over and can change is yourself.
Right.
And so if someone is in your family or in your circle and you do not feel comfortable with the way that they are behaving, you really truly cannot change them, but you really truly can speak for yourself.
Yep.
And that becomes about connection to self and respect for self.
Yeah.
And another area that we talk a lot about in our family is boundaries. You can't talk like that in front of me. That doesn't fly. I will not participate in conversations where that word is used. And I don't care if you think I'm a jerk because of that. Like, if you think I'm a jerk because of that, now I know. now the boundary has been drawn.
Yeah.
And that's easier said than done. Yeah. Jesus. I'll bring my own deviled eggs to Grandma Jean's. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think so. Does that make sense when I say that, like, they have to arrive at the decision that change has to happen on their own?
Yes, I think the on their own thing was like, you're going to need massive amounts of support to make change like this. Like, this is not, when you arrive there on your own, you don't
then you seek out you seek out the helpers
and support
and connection and community. And that is just another thing, like, that is a fundamental component also of, like, you can't do it alone. You're not supposed to do it alone. And I think that is
I think that's where I was headed, where it was like, okay, I understand that everybody gets there as an individual, but we don't make change without individuals connecting.
Right. That is, I mean, we're fundamentally social creatures.
Right.
And we can't do it all by ourselves. And I think, again, that compartmentalization of society and our culture has set us up to believe that we can, like, you don't ask for help, just put your head down and go, but that's not actually how it is supposed to work. I fully believe that it's a community effort. It's a human connection effort.
Right. So. Well, and I also think, I mean, you and I had this conversation over the past week of, it isn't just about being anti-racist. For me anyway, it is about shifting or including being pro-diversity. Like, we've talked about this in the context of our relationship. I grew up with casseroles and hot dish and chow mein from a can. And like, it was, you have joked, and maybe it's accurate, that salt and pepper was my spice palette, right? Like, that was as far as it went. And like, sorry, Mom, if you're watching this, but, and adding in learning about garlic and onions and peppers. And
I'll never forget one of our first adult type dates when we went to the Pickled Parrot in Minneapolis, and you ordered the jalapeno angel hair pasta, or jalapeno with white sauce, whatever it was, but it was like diced, minced, finely chopped jalapenos, like, I
thought it was going to be like slices where I could pick it off and just have a bowl of buttered noodles. That's really what I thought was going to happen. But they had diced the jalapenos so finely into the sauce that I was dying.
This was, we were still dating. I think you lived in La Crosse and you'd come up to visit. And
it was shortly after we started our reconnection, because I didn't. Yeah. Oh God. I could probably eat that now.
I was like, you don't have to eat that. Like,
oh my God. So many other issues though. It was like money then, like, oh my God, he bought me this meal, and oh no, I'm so white. Like, I can't handle any type of spice. And I mean, you would have asked for like extra, all of it. Like, can I have extra jalapenos on mine? I've come a long way we've diversified our food, we've diversified our music, we're diversifying our bookshelves. Like,
Yeah.
what
Well,
I'm recognizing is that there's so much, it feels so good
mhm.
to expand your awareness and palette.
And your experiences are that much richer. And I think the again, the trick that has been played on us is that, like, if you work hard and you get to this point, then everything will be great. But what we're finding out and what we're learning and what
Yeah.
we've continually talked about in our relationship and with our clients over the last, I don't know how many years, is that there is no sedentary spot on the continuum. We're always moving, and even if you're not moving, the world around you is. And so sometimes we find ourselves being left behind, but
Yeah.
but again, everyone is at a different place on that continuum, but progression is necessary. Like, you can't be stagnant and stay sitting still. But there's only one place where that happens, and that's, at the end, right?
Right.
There's only one finish line. But
I do
we're
think that, especially where I was raised in the context of the Midwest, it's like, just stay in your lane, work hard, do your thing, go to church, check the boxes, and you'll be happy.
Mhm.
And that has not ever really worked for me.
And I think that that's a level of stagnation now,
Right.
looking back at that now, like, because.
But I also think some of that was foundational, where it was like, if you oh, what was that face?
Nothing. I was picking at something on my hand.
Oh, okay. You furrowed your brow, and I was like,
Well, I looked at the way that I was sitting, and I'm like, that looks weird. Like,
oh,
I was looking at my. So go ahead.
The foundational piece of, like, the phrase that happens in my house: you get your ducks in a row, or you get your poop in a group, which is so gross, but sorry, I said it. I know. And you do all of that, and that leads to a good life. And I do think that I do think that there is an element of predictability, and I think you and I have that, where we have a little bit more flexibility because we've got the stability.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're able to make different decisions, and diversity can be seen as a positive thing because our nervous systems aren't always kicked in for crisis.
Yep.
Right? Like,
Yep.
If you see something different when you have only ever seen white people, and you do see color, please stop saying that you don't see color. When you see color, if that trips your nervous system because you have been micro conditioned at every level that Black means bad, your nervous system's going to be like, that's a hell no, instead of, I'm curious, how could this actually make my life more enhanced? Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be the nervous system no. And I think at every time where I've been calm enough or available enough or in a space of, like, I'll try just about anything food wise, except for weird bugs and stuff. I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's going to enhance my life yet. Maybe that's further down on the continuum. But every time I've been exposed to a different type of culture or different food or different music or dance or whatever, it's been to my benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're talking a lot about anti-racism, but I think that eventually we do get to include, oh my God, so much benefit can come to your life too.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to take care of each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is about it. And I think now more than ever, we're so interconnected.
Yeah.
Not physically, but electronically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that hard to, like, and actually I think it's more approachable for people to start that journey with a Google search,
Sure. Yeah.
like, but
but you have to want to do that. You got to seek that out.
Right. But I also think it is exceedingly important then to have that physical interaction
With someone who doesn't look like you.
Yeah, I just think it's and especially for kids. I think I keep coming back to this, like, before they leave their house as an adult, they've already been informed about the wider world and how dangerous it is and how bad different people who don't look like you are, and that is, then they take that experience into their adult life, and it just continues the cycle. Not everyone, but enough people that have that experience then, you know, move out into the world, and that it continues the cycle.
Right.
And I think the more we can interact with kids, and the more we can, not you and I, but like other people, you know, the parents, like, and aunts and uncles and whatever the thing, whoever has it's the influence, like, it's important for them to know that the world is, you know, not everyone looks like you, but not everyone that doesn't look like you is bad, right? It is too easy to paint people that you've never interacted with a broad brush. And I think that is where our where our advantage is, like where our access to change is. Because I mean, wouldn't it be great if our grandchildren grew up in a world where they're like, what are you talking about? What does that mean?
I think that's what happened with you and I, because I have given this a lot of thought of like, why have we not been doing this before? And I think because in our home, our micro family of 5, race was not an issue, and it was celebrated. Like, I think it was so shocking to our kids, because within the context of our family, diversity is just, it's a given. We didn't have to introduce them to you as Black. It wasn't, I mean, that was never like.
Right. I mean, we're not born inherently racist.
Right.
Just like we're not born inherently like sexist.
Right.
That is a fundamental function of our surroundings as a child, or as a teenager, or whatever the thing is. But then it informs everything after that.
Right. And this will require consciousness. Like, I think what you're talking about, some people who are raising Klan kids, that's a conscious choice of hate. For a lot of this, it's well-intentioned people trying to, you know, do their job, get ahead, do their thing. They're not actively trying to hurt anyone. And that is where the revolution lies in my mind right now, where it's not enough to have it just be about you. It's not enough for your family to be doing okay. It's not enough for your color of people to be okay. And I think
and I think the messaging, or the idea that I live 60 miles from the Twin Cities, so this is not my problem, this is not my fight, is not true, right? But I think that is, so there's another opportunity to, like, okay, how do we have this conversation with someone who lives really far away from any type of diversity? But even in some of those places, it's there.
Of course.
They just choose not to interact with it, because there are migrant workers that populate all of these little towns. There are Asian farmers who come out to some of these rural areas where there's land where they can farm and take their stuff back to the farm. So, I mean, and it does affect us all. It's just like the idea that sexual assault or domestic abuse is a woman's issue. Actually, it's not. It's a men's issue, and it's a family
issue. It's a human rights issue.
Absolutely, it is. All of this, you know, the language, the way you describe something, words have power, and it matters how you frame it. And so the idea that this discussion doesn't need to be taking place, for instance, in River Falls, because there aren't enough Black people here for it to matter. It does matter. I live here, you know, there are other African Americans who live here, and there are Latinos who live here, and there are Asian people that live here. So while yes, the population is mostly white, it's not all white.
Right.
And the issues do exist here.
Right.
And not talking about them only perpetuates it.
And what a unique opportunity to be able to say, like, we're affecting change where we live. Like, that is the point. And I think that as we wrap up this episode, if that's the right word, this installment, affecting change where you are is how change happens on a global scale.
Yeah, I
When
think
you get too far out, too far macro, you get paralyzed. When you can go to your home, to your individual heart, to your extended family, it matters. That is how change happens.
yes,
That is why you
100%.
have conversations with the mayor and the chief of police and calling on representatives, and that's
Mhm.
how you individually are making change, right?
Yeah.
Doing
Mhm.
shit that you never thought you would do. It's so
Stepping
funny.
outside of the zone.
Well, expanding the zone,
Hey,
expanding the zone of
sure.
normal, right?
Comfort. Yeah.
So, any final thoughts as we wrap?
Went a lot better than I thought.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't sure
We
how
haven't
the
read any comments
conversation
yet either.
how the conversation was going to go. And that's fine. I mean, maybe nobody's watching, but
Well,
it
but I also think that, go
it
ahead.
goes back to the stories, like sharing your experiences. A, you know, there's someone that this will resonate with, and B,
Right.
it's a validation of the things that you've experienced. Like,
Right.
and so then that's what people want. They want to be heard, they want to be validated, and they want to be able to express themselves. And those
Right.
are all good things.
Well, and I
So
think
I
that,
encourage people to continue to do that.
yeah, I still think that you and I will have a disagreement about like the use of the N word. Like it's still going to impact me in a way that you don't
Mhm.
have to manage. I'm going to have to manage that on my own.
Sure.
But it's also, I think if we wind it all the way back, it is about intention.
Mhm.
And if your intention is to hurt and you are telling like racist, hateful jokes and using this word, it's one thing. And
Mhm.
we do need to broaden our tolerance or appreciation or experience around, just because you don't understand what's happening between two people who are in agreement about what's happening, it doesn't mean that like your understanding isn't required for them to live their life. And
Mhm.
I know that argument could potentially be twisted to, if two racists are having a conversation and you don't understand it, like we just have to have tolerance. But I'm still going to call bullshit on that because yeah, I don't know if I opened up another
And
goal here.
fundamentally, at the end of the day, don't be a racist.
I
Like,
mean,
I don't know. I just I
hashtag don't be a racist.
yeah. What was the T-shirt? Maybe we
No,
see.
that's for another day.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's in a small group where we can use all sorts of colorful language and it's not here.
All right. Fair
Stay
enough.
tuned for the t-shirt line that's coming. Anyway, thank you for being willing to have this conversation. I know when I first posed the topic that there was a little bit of like, why are we starting there? But I do think it made sense once we started
Mhm.
uncovering it between the two of us. But
Absolutely.
thank you for being willing and sharing your perspective. Thank you for watching. If you've got questions, like write them in the comments. This is a safe space for you to feel awkward and stupid. And if you're gonna be a racist, just leave. If you have a legit question where you're like, oh God, I don't know what to do, private message us. Like our goal is not to shut it down. We may come back with a challenge. We may come back with like, you need to do your own Google search. But we do want to be a safe place for you to like dip your toe in, step in, and make that decision that anti-racist is the only choice right now. So cool. Thank you, sweetie. Hold on, I'm gonna go unlive, but I'll be right there.
Live.
Unlive. Yeah. Okay, friends, we will see you next Wednesday at noon. And yeah, if this was helpful, like and share it, and we'll see you next week.